Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's IANA webinar, Understanding the Cyber Vulnerabilities to the Intermodal Network. This is part of the Business of Intermodal Continues series. We're excited to have you here. I'm excited to have this session. We've talked about it for a while, so we're really excited to bring this together today. Before we get started, I want to thank our year-long sponsors, particularly the Platinum Plus sponsors who are bringing the session to us today, as well as a number of other sessions throughout the year. But the Platinum Plus sponsors have been really instrumental in supporting our education program, and we thank them very much. So with that, I am going to turn it over to my friend Tom Williams from BNSF to do a quick introduction of this session, and I will see you on the other side.
Hello, everyone. I'm Tom Williams, the Group Vice President for Consumer Products at BNSF Railway and a member of IANA's Board of Directors. On behalf of all of my colleagues that go the extra mile for our customers and communities, I would like to welcome you to this IANA webcast, Understanding the Cyber Vulnerabilities in the Intermodal Network, part of IANA's The Business of Intermodal Continues program. Today's topic is certainly timely. With the explosion of technology in our personal and professional lives, we've never had more opportunity to gain efficiencies and benefit from this innovation, particularly in transportation. But with that opportunity also comes increased risks from cyber threats. Today's panel will explore what some of those risks are, how to approach the challenge, plus you'll hear from participants who will share lessons learned from firsthand experiences. Hal Pollard, IANA's Director of Education, will be joined by today's moderator, IANA's own Jan Palmbak, the Senior Vice President for Information Systems for the Association. This should be a great session. Now I'll turn it over to Jan to introduce the panel and get us started.
Good afternoon, and thank you for the introduction. I'm glad we're able to pull everyone away from the ongoing elections that I'm sure most of us have running in the background. I'm also fairly certain that by the end of this webinar, we still won't know who's won. Thank you so much for investing your time with us today. As mentioned, my name is Jan Palmbak, and I head up Information Services at IANA. I'm the moderator for today's discussion around cybersecurity under the Business of Intermodal Continues program. Joining me on our panel discussion, we have Wade Anderson, CIO from Bay & Bay, and Brian Prentice, partner at Oliver Wyman. Today, we have an engaging panel on cybersecurity where we'll be talking about some of the ongoing threats of an attack, who should be involved, steps that should be taken, realizing that we need to prepare for the when and not the ifs of an event. Our goal today is that whatever your specific role is in the industry, that you'll come away with something that you can apply to be more proactive and prepared in your business for a potential cyber event. Here's the format to give you an idea of what to expect. We'll take a few moments of each of the panelists to briefly introduce themselves and tell a little bit about their background in the industry and their experience with cybersecurity. I'll kick off the conversation asking questions that'll draw out some high-level themes and trends that we should be thinking about. As Hal mentioned, we'll then open up the Q&A to give the viewers an opportunity to ask specific questions that you've been thinking about to help you navigate the ongoing challenges that we're all aware of but don't always know where to begin. Let's get started with the panel introductions. Wade, if you'd like to kick us off a little bit about yourself.
Sure, thanks, Jan. As you said, my name is Wade Anderson. I've been with Bay & Bay Transportation, a trucking and multimodal intermodal company out of the Twin Cities. We're in the suburbs of St. Paul, Minnesota. Been there about 2.5 years, but I've been in the industry, information technology, for over 27 years. And throughout many of my tours of duty, I've had a lot of cybersecurity, information security experience. I head up technology for Bay & Bay, also marketing for the company, and have been in the Twin Cities working IT for that whole duration.
Thanks, Wade. Brian?
Thanks, Jan, and good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for having me today. So I'm Brian Prentice. As you said, I'm a partner at Oliver Wyman in the transportation practice, and I've spent about the last 18 years working with organizations that transport goods and services. So, maritime, road, rail, and air. And probably in about the last 5 years, my practice has really turned more towards cybersecurity, and we've partnered up with Oliver Wyman's cybersecurity practice that was really born and developed in financial services and IT. So I'll talk a little bit maybe about that today, but taken a lot of what we've learned from other industries, from financial services, from the likes of Google and Amazon and the like, and brought those into transportation and operational settings so that we're learning from other industries and trying to bring the best to bear for our combined benefit. Certainly look forward to the conversation today, and thanks again for having me.
Thanks, Wade and Brian. To get us started, cyber incidents are escalating in frequency, duration, and complexity. Hardly a day goes by without a news story about a breach or sophisticated mechanism of a cyber attack. And we know that cybersecurity threats come from many sources: criminal, hired hackers, terrorists, and even misguided computer experts to see what they're able to penetrate. Cyber threats pose non-discriminating risk across all industries, which the intermodal industry is no stranger to, as top 4 of the ocean carriers have been subject to attacks in the last 4 years, 2 in the last 7 months alone, disrupting their businesses. Multiple trucking companies have been penetrated over the last few months as well. The list goes on and grows. No one is immune. We also know that the intermodal industry becomes more technologically advanced, the more likely they are to become targets for security threats, both informational and operational. This has been amplified in the last year with the COVID-19 pandemic, as organizations have pushed for technological advances, not only in their frontline operating model, but also their back office operations, which is a perfect opener for Wade to speak to us about an up-close and personal experience he's had with ransomware. Wade, would you mind sharing with the group what ransomware is and how you were directly involved with an attack?
Sure, happily. As I mentioned, Jan, I'd started at Bay about 2.5 years ago. I was literally on my first week on the job, just learning, going through orientation, learning where the restrooms are and everything everybody does in the first week of orientation. Thursday afternoon, one of my employees burst into my office and said, "We have a problem," and all of our systems were shutting down very rapidly. Of course, my new employees, I ordered them to shut everything down, but it was really too late. All of our servers, over 70 servers in a kind of a co-managed environment data center, were all being locked up and encrypted on a very rapid basis. So by the time we had them shut down, the damage was done. It was too late, and they had been ransomed and encrypted. So if you went on any of the systems, you could look at a file and it would basically say, "We have your files. We have the keys to unlock your files. If you pay us in Bitcoin, we will give you those keys." Well, we did what we thought any company would do, sort of intuitively. Every company has backups, data backups. So we thought, well, why don't we just restore from our backups of all those 70 systems, get everything back online, operational. Let's prioritize. Again, we're kind of half trucking company, refrigerated in bulk, and then half multimodal, intermodal logistics broker. So we have both things going on. Our trucking side has Trimble products, so they're all in our data center. Our brokerage and intermodal are more cloud-based, so they weren't as impacted as much. But all of our email servers, all of our other infrastructure was at this data center and therefore encrypted and ransomed. So we tried to do the restore by Thursday night, probably 8 hours later to figure it out. Tried to restore 2 a.m. in the morning. I went home at 1 a.m. At 2:30 a.m. I got a phone call and said, we have a problem. The restores have stopped and the backups are deleted. It appears to be an active hacker on our network. And so not only were all of our systems locked up, but we were thwarted every chance we got to try to restore various systems in parallel. So I went back into the office and determined over the next few hours to consider what most think is not a good thing, but paying the ransom. I spoke to 15 different companies, insurance, cybersecurity companies, and experts I know. Again, I've been being in the industry here in the Twin Cities. I know a lot of people in security roles at different large corporations here in the Minneapolis area. I reached out to a lot of them, and one very senior consultant said, "Wait, I'll tell you something I've never told anybody, but I think you should pay the ransom. They got you, by the neck. There's not much you can do. They forced your hand, so you should consider paying the ransom." We did that, worked back through our insurance company. They connected us to a great cybersecurity firm out of New York named Kivu, K-I-V-U, who was able to make communication with these cyber criminals. They were able to contact them for proof of life, proof of decryption, basically send them a couple files, make sure they can, because again, it's a lock and key system, right? So you got to make sure that they have the key. And again, I aligned with our CFO and my CEO and made the decision together to go ahead and pay the ransom, working with this cybersecurity firm. And so long story short, we did. Everybody intuitively thinks two things when paying a ransom. One, the Bitcoin is a one-way transaction. You're kind of throwing money over the wall, hoping something comes back. And then second, they think, well, if you pay the ransom, aren't they going to tell all their hacker friends on the dark web that you're a soft target, and therefore others will come after you in very short order? Again, after speaking to a lot of experts, realized neither of these would be the case, and decided to make the call to go ahead and pay the ransom. We did. We got the keys back. It was Friday night by the time we transferred the Bitcoin to the wallet. Late Friday night, Saturday morning, the longest 7 hours of my life. Because they were in a different time zone, clearly. But 10 a.m. they got back and gave us the keys. It took us about 36 hours, and we were about 95% operational by Monday morning when everybody came back. And we're a 24/7 operation, but the majority of our people are, business hours Monday through Friday. So by the time 6 a.m. Monday rolled around, we were able to recover almost everything, and then work with our current service providers at the time to lock things down better. We've since turned over to service providers because they were also sort of over their skis. If you're going to choose sort of an outsourced help desk and infrastructure partner, you want to make sure they have some security chops, so to speak. And the firm we were with clearly didn't. So anyway, I know we're going to talk a little bit about solutions and costs and things going forward, but we kind of got lucky, right? We were able to pay the ransom. We were able to recover. Everybody asked me a couple of questions. One, how much did it cost? It was 6 Bitcoin. You could do the math. It was about $6,500 at the time. And so about 40 grand for the payment. And then, how long did the process take? And again, for us, just being kind of caught flat-footed, not knowing where to go, not knowing where to turn, and reaching out for every resource we can, took us about 3.5 days from the point of hack to the point of, mostly operational.
Heck of a way to start a new role, for sure. Welcome on board, right?
Thank you. Yeah.
Brian, listening to Wade's scenario, when it comes to cybersecurity, what do we typically identify as the biggest culprits of an attack? Who's most susceptible? For one,
Yeah.
and then also, what would be some of the recommendations, as Wade mentioned, to get ownership and engagement throughout the organization's board, senior management, and even frontline staff?
Yeah, thanks, John. It was a good question. I hadn't actually heard Wade's story before. You guys kept it from me, so my reaction would be genuine here today. And that is a crazy way to start a role, and also probably one of the better outcomes that I've heard, right? I mean, a very good outcome. And, we'll get into this later. We'll talk a little bit about how they actually penetrated, the network, and how the hackers actually got in and deposited some of that ransomware. And there's all sorts of, you heard all sorts of very interesting stories about how different companies are penetrated. But really, when it comes to, areas of weak links, it really comes down to people, right? The ones and the zeros always kind of work the way that they're supposed to. But, most of the intrusions, most of the hacking that we see are really about social engineering, right? Email phishing scams, people clicking on things, downloading malware, doing things that they ought not to be doing or didn't know that they were supposed to be doing, right? And sometimes I liken cybersecurity to loss prevention in a retail shop, right? Nothing is 100% secure and safe. If somebody really wants to steal from you or really wants to get to you, they can find a way. The whole idea around cybersecurity and cyber resilience is to figure out how do you make it more difficult to penetrate your network and your operation than maybe somebody else's? And then when it does happen, how do you actually recover? And so I think on your question about, how do we get buy-in from the top down, I think boards are actually, in my experience, boards are very sensitive to this issue. They're aware of the issue. They're worried about the risk. There's a little bit of risk these days that folks are actually getting a little desensitized because we hear about cyber intrusions, we hear about cyber hacks in our personal lives and our private lives all the time. And it sort of has become just a norm of the business world. And I think we all need to remember that it's part of doing business going forward. And so if you start at the top and you have executives, board members that are worried about it and interested about it, and then, really it's about driving that down into the organization and having some processes and developing a culture of cybersecurity, right? We all have cultures of safety, of physical safety. We have cultures of physical security. We have cultures of, being on time and delivering for our customers and our clients. But we really need to also, drive into our cultures this culture of cybersecurity, because it's going to be a part of our business going forward. I think, really the big thing that I talk to folks about when it comes to developing that culture is planning for it, right? And one of the ways that you can get people engaged is to actually create, desktop procedures or simulations and run simulations throughout the year, right? Maybe once or twice a year, in order so that everybody understands what their roles are and what the pitfalls could be, And the more that we practice for it, it's just like everything else. The more that we practice for it, the more that we talk about it, the more people are going to be aware of it. And the more, when it does happen, and I think, Jan, you said this earlier, right? It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. When it does happen, we all know our roles. We can react very quickly, and we can have a positive outcome like Wade did.
Thank you. Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because that's even something that we're starting to do as well, right? It's sending out more tests and getting people kind of into the routine of, hey, if you don't know what this is, don't click on it. Just send it onward to the IT department and say, hey, I received something. That's the automatic place that we're trying to get to. And it's a shift. You know, it's not we're out to get you. It's, hey, we just want you to get the mindset of, if I get something that I'm unaware of and it doesn't look right, something looks funky about it, you know, and it just takes that extra second to look at things, and you can always kind of spot that irregularity and say, okay, this needs to go to IT. Now, so Wade, based on your experience and Brian's response on kind of how to drive this down through the organization, and, you know, having sat in the front seat of that roller coaster, you know, how has that changed the awareness in your organization through and through?
Sure. Yeah. So I will go back one step if we're talking about the people element. I know Kevin Mitnick, one of the most popular hackers of all time, did say your biggest vulnerability is not your firewalls or whatever, it's your people, certainly. But in our case, it was actually our firewall. So this is important, you know, and I know we're going to talk more about phish testing and education and data protection culture, which I call it at our company. But the first thing, and really what got us, that's the third question people ask, is how did they do it? How did they get in? How did an active hacker get in your network? It wasn't by an email and a link and that kind of thing, which is, you know, a common hypothesis. For us, it was we had an open port on our firewall used for remote support that a lot of companies have, and I've seen a lot of companies have. And so I think a first thing you should do, and a critical thing to kind of take away from this, is find a partner. You can do it on the cheap too, because I know we're a fiscally conservative industry having narrow margins quite often. But you can hire companies pretty quickly to check and review your firewall policies. In our case, we had an open port, and they just walk right in. They went after our accounts. We didn't have a good password policy. They were able to use a common account called Trainer and then hit it against the password dictionary database, and they were able to upgrade their credentials and basically take over our network. And it wasn't that hard for them to do. And these are free tools, by the way. Call them script kiddies. People that can download free tools like this from the internet. You could be a hacker in a couple of hours, a couple of YouTube videos and some free tools. So they were able to get in and really confiscate our credentials, and then, you know, use that to do ill and be bad actors on our network. But now bridging into what Brian is saying, I'm absolutely 100%. I think once you do that baseline and just know that the blocking and tackling, the zeros and ones are done, which isn't that much work, by the way. Get the zeros and ones done, just get a solid firewall and firewall policies in place, and then it kind of runs itself. You know, there's a little bit of maintenance. Then you shift to what is the bigger threat on an ongoing basis, which is your employees. Our personal successes is, you know, everybody likes to say it starts from the top. It does. It needs to be cast down. And again, I call it data protectionism culture. Everybody's job, everybody has their job description. Everybody should have a bullet point that a primary responsibility is to protect the data of your customers, your partners, in our case, carriers and rail lines, and then our employees, our drivers, all of that. And so we did that and had an information security policy, but made sure everybody acknowledged it and goes through that process every year, as well as they're onboarded. So there's that piece. And then, you know, we hired a third party to do really a triple penetration test, external, internal, and Wi-Fi. And they ran our first phish test too. So phish testing, of course, is where you mock up an email. You try to get those people, you try to get your employees to click on something, and rather than causing harm, you use it to educate. So we outsourced that at first, but then we're able to bring it in with a product called Nova4. It's pretty cheap. It's pretty easy to use. It's a great platform. And so we've had a lot of success with that. Now we do it every couple of months. We send out the phish emails. We send out prizes and awards for those that report the phish to the help desk or to IT. Give them a little Swedish fish. And then we have a grand prize for all those that spotted the phish every cycle. And then those that click on the phish have mandatory education. If they do it twice, they get a conversation with the CIO. If they do it 3 times, they get slapped on the hand pretty hard. So again, it's been good for us. And again, I think everybody is top of mind. Of course, we all got hacked and everybody felt that in the company, but we've had a lot of new employees during the last 2.5 years too. So now it is, I think, part of our culture. But you do need the cultural element. You do need to invest something. Again, I think we're generally a fiscally conservative kind of industry, and some of those things are just neglected over time. But they can cause, just like you buy insurance, right? You have to invest something for risk, and this is a risk avoidance type of play. And I think everybody thinks you need to overdo it. We did it pretty inexpensively, and we put in some industrial grade firewalls. Even I compared 8 different firms, and we're able to choose one that was within our price range. And so, like Brian said, we were lucky. We were fortunate to recover and not be in worse shape, kind of coming out of that. But the steps we took in the next couple of weeks were still thrifty, but when executed, they were very successful, and they helped us a lot. And now I think, we had that same company come back into a second test just in the last 6 months, and where I'd say before we were getting C's and C minuses, we were up in the B plus, A minus range, and you'll never get the A or A plus, right? Like Brian says, when there's a will, there's a way, right? Or loss prevention. I mean, there's if someone wants to, but you don't want to be a soft target. We were a soft target because that open port. I think a lot of people are soft targets if they're not educating their personnel, their employees, to not click on that link, and to continue, like you say, spend that extra second, think about it, and educate them on what are the things to look for, right? Sometimes just moving around the mouse before you open something or click on something. It's not that hard. It takes a couple extra seconds, especially if it's something from someone and it doesn't quite look right. Your CEO wanting you to buy digital gift cards, right? Or whatever it is. But when we go through our fish testing too, it's very organic. So everybody gets a different one. So they don't prairie dog and pop up from their desk and say, hey, look out for this fake email from Sam Anderson, our CEO. Ironically, we get hit a lot with the HR open enrollment benefits, and the one from me that looks like, hey, to validate your credentials, it looks like it's coming from me, and people click on it, right? And it's a fish. I'm like, well, I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't be asking for your password. Even in my training, I say, if anybody in IT ever asks for your password, it's fake, right? I mean, we're not going to do that. So all that together, again, we had a lot of success, and a lot of our focus. The first phase really was the zeros and ones and blocking and tackling that we just neglected and just had that. And I've seen other companies have the same thing, and it really doesn't cost that much just to come in and make sure that you don't have open holes and that your network's not like Swiss cheese. And then 2, really focus on the ongoing education of your employees and make sure that they don't continue to open the holes to your network.
People always fun that way, right? The minute you tell them don't do something, it's the first thing that they typically do afterwards.
Right, exactly.
Now, so I'm going to kind of send a little question to Brian on this because, obviously, Wade, you have a much easier task now when you talk cybersecurity and putting budgetary funds aside for doing that going forward. I mean, obviously, there's plenty of companies out there, and I highly recommend doing it. They're not expensive to do vulnerability scans, right? Just to see where do you have open doors in your networks and in your systems. And that can be done on the cheap. Now, getting into fixing it and everything else, that's a different story, but at least you know where you can start preparing. So Brian, to that point, like how should organizations think about this? Because a lot of folks tend to think that cybersecurity, I make an investment one time and it's now done. Like I don't have to worry about this, but that's not real, right? That's once you make that investment, then that investment kind of has to keep happening. What would you recommend companies to kind of help senior management understand that this is a growing concern and it's going to continue to have an increased amount of cost exposure?
Yeah, it's how do I say this? It's like watering the garden. You plant it and that takes a little bit of work, but then you got to continue to water it as we go. And I like what Wade was saying is that the initial ones and zeros always work the way that they're supposed to work, and the initial ones and zeros is something that everybody has to do. But what we find, or what I found, is that in organizations where this really has taken hold, is cybersecurity is really it's a partnership between technology and between operations, right? And it's something that is operations and the day-to-day people who are running the company actually see it as part of their remit, as part of their job, and we report on it, we talk about it, right? And I think one of the things that's really helped us in personal safety and physical safety and vehicle safety is we talk about accidents, we talk about near misses, we report on them, and it's part of our our updates and everything. And we need to organizations that are very advanced in this bring that same sort of reporting and that same sort of discussion from a cyber perspective into leadership meetings, employee updates, and even into the boardroom from a board update perspective. Maybe two things I want to say about this too, right? One is, and I think Wade hit on it, is that getting outside help here, can be done, and is not self-serving because I'm a consultant, but I think that actually getting third-party support in something like this really helps. It helps to get that expertise. It helps to get that fresh set of eyes, and it can be done in a very fiscally responsible way. So getting some third-party support to help identify and value, what are your vulnerabilities, where are they, how much are they worth, and what could the impact be? Because sometimes to get a little bit of attention of the organization, having a third party kind of dangle that out in front of you as well and say, hey, these are your vulnerabilities, and this is how easy it would be to shut down the operation or to hold you for ransom, or these are the kinds of repercussions that you could get from how you're set up today. And it's not something, I think, Wade, you even said this about your third-party providers, it's not something you can outsource, right? Because no one is going to care about your business or care about your security more than you are. So it has to come from inside of the company. You can't rely on your third-party, providers to do it. This is really something I think that we all need to continue to educate ourselves on, talk about, make a part of our normal management reviews, our normal operating, KPI reviews and dashboards, and continue to focus on it in a meaningful way going forward, because it is one of the biggest risks, and it's going to increase for really, I think, for two reasons, and we haven't talked about this, but I'll throw these two reasons out. One is it's definitely a growth industry. Bad actors are making money and continuing to go, and they're getting smarter and they're getting better, and their tool sets are getting better. So we need to stay on top of them. But also two is regulations are coming down, right? And the regulations, we're starting to see laws and data privacy laws and personal privacy laws that have, even further and wider ranging impacts than just the business interruption. So it's something that in order to, kind of be good stewards of the business and being fiscally responsible, that we have to stay on top of. Otherwise, it can do more damage than just shutting our operations down, if you can imagine anything worse than that.
It's interesting because, a lot of conversations, we talk about informational technology, ransomwares, but as we all know, our industry is shifting to be much more operational based. So we're implementing technologies, autonomous trucks, automated facilities, where, there's going to be much less human interaction, but much more systems working with one another, which to me, there's going to be an inherent growth in the operational technology security. How does that change the future landscape? We spend a lot of time figuring out how to protect data, but when we start talking about the operational aspect, and I'll kind of actually open this up to both of you, what does that future playbook look like?
I worry about it, Wade. How about you? I worry about it a bit.
Yeah, I really kind of break it into a few different categories. One thing we do, and it's relevant right now, is just double brokering, right? As a broker, something you don't want to do. Stolen freight, we've had that, but it's been many years. Redirecting, right? That's why we don't allow double brokering through our logistics side of our house. And then hypothetically, the University of Michigan did a study, it's been a few years, but where you can hijack a truck, right? These are just computers and trucks now, the big rigs, right? You can actually, theoretically, you can hack that truck. Their ELD system is plugged right into the computer. It is a computer, right? And so theoretically, they could pull over a truck and take the freight in that truck for ransom. So all those kinds of things are possible. When you get into autonomous trucks, it gets even more complicated, Jan, to your point. But it's certainly something we're concerned about and try to keep our finger on the pulse of every day. And again, even when we're choosing solutions for our just rolled out a driver app, for example, our ELD solutions, anything where you've got that sort of intersection of technology and hauling freight, it is certainly a concern for us.
I'm with you 100%, right? I mean, I think technology really does help us become, be more efficient and productive and all those sorts of things. But the more technology that's rolled out, the more geographically dispersed we are, the more people that are connecting to each one of the different, networks and Wi-Fi and sharing with customers and all these things that really help us run the operation better, also create more and more attack surfaces and more linkages where we are, susceptible to intrusion. And so as that continues to grow, and maybe we'll talk about autonomous trucks later, because that's a whole another section where technology really intersects with the physical world. But as we think about these operational technologies that right now are really information and data, and can lead to fraud and can lead to all sorts of other things that are really challenging, it just heightens the awareness that we all need to then be even more on our game in terms of detecting and responding to intrusions. And I think that's the other big thing, is once something does happen, making sure that we all know our roles in recovery or in identifying it and raising the alarm sooner, because the sooner the sooner we can do something about it and the more we can mitigate it.
Brian, in your experience, do you feel that the industry is keeping up with that piece? Are we ready to start handling those threats? It's obviously still early, but I feel like the technology is moving very fast in that direction. We all know that when we built systems years and years ago, right, we didn't take into account a lot of the threats that we deal with today, right? In fact, most systems, antiquated systems, tend to not have that even as a measure. Have we learned from that? Are we seeing companies being more prepared for technological threats around the operating systems?
I think we are, right? I mean, I think, how would I say this? Is a great question, right? Because I think on one hand, the threats we're facing today aren't the threats we're going to be facing 6 months from now, a year from now, 2 years from now. They're going to continue to change and evolve. And so the way that I see companies and industries responding to it is a little more dynamic, right? Because we've realized that it's not a static thing. It's actually, we can't build it into 100% into our systems. We need to be very responsive. I think as we move into this physical realm, right, and where technology has the ability to move physical things like autonomous vehicles or autonomous loaders or any of those sorts of things, I think that technology is really exciting and it's getting adopted. But I think there's a couple of things there that give me a little bit of hope. One is I see a lot of people taking their time and wading into that technology into those platforms and trying to learn from other industries, right? Trying to learn from, autonomous drones, trying to learn from autonomous cars, trying to learn from, autonomous trains. And what can we learn from those sorts of things for autonomous trucks? And how do we, bring the best from everywhere else to apply to what we're doing today, so that we don't have to solve all the problems ourselves, but we can get a real leg up and we can get a good shot in the arm by learning from other industries and what other people have gone through. I think the adoption of the technology is going to slow down. And we didn't talk about this earlier, but I'll throw this out. The adoption of some of this technology is going to be a little slow because there is a lack of standardization, right? There are some regulatory requirements, but there's not a ton of regulatory standards or a governing body that a lot of these technologies have to comply to. And so the technologies are going to compete themselves in the market from a safety perspective and from an operational perspective, which I think is good, because we hopefully will end up with better outcomes, and the market will drive us to better outcomes. But it's going to delay, in some cases, the installation, because nobody really wants to spend a whole lot of money and infrastructure on a technology or a process or a system that then becomes outdated, right? At some point, someone had a bunch of Betamax VCRs, and that was not a good, it was a great technology, but it wasn't the winning technology in the long run. And so I think we've learned from that over the history, and so I think that'll slow down a little bit. But I think that also then creates an opportunity for industry associations or associations that are working on behalf of the industry to help set some of those guidelines and guideposts and give some advice or give some assistance overall, so that the industry itself can be smarter and come together. Because at the end of the day, we should all be just like everything else. We should all be in this together, and we should see cybersecurity and data security as a shared goal, because we all are going to be interconnected at some point through our customers, through our suppliers, or just through our intercompany dealings.
No, I appreciate that. And again, I know I took a little bit off on a tangent because it's, a lot of focus definitely does go on the informational side. And I think there's so much out there on that piece. I think as we move towards the operational side, that's where it's, that's going to be the next really interesting thing in the market to look at. But pulling it back a little bit, we talked earlier, we typically know that the statistics tell us that the organization's weakest links tends to be its employees. Do we think that there's going to be liability or future exposure actually for the actual incumbent who may have inadvertently caused a breach? Where does that responsibility fall? I mean, today, company, right? That's who gets looked at. So do we think that there's ever going to be an actual responsibility on the employee?
It's a great question. I think there already is to some extent. This is a balance thing too, right? It's risk and versus the tolerance to invest. And like you said earlier, we had the catalyst of being shocked into investing into both the cyber awareness for our employees, with the blocking and tackling stuff, firewalls, and whatever that we talked about. And again, you can go crazy with this. The level of, there's a two-factor authentication, encryption on every device. Bring your own device. Again, it depends. I think we have a broader audience out here, but we're a pretty small company. We're a mid-sized company, but we are try to be fiscally responsible with our dollars and the narrow margins that are, especially on the trucking side. And so we need to be very diligent about every investment. And so, we don't always choose the biggest enterprise solutions that would be used for a Best Buy or United Healthcare, to use some local companies here in the Twin Cities. So, you have to right size that approach. I think you need to be diligent and confident in your investment. Make sure you do it right for your company. And again, I do think that if you educate your employees that it is everybody's responsibility, you all share in this, right? We're all here to protect the data of all of our stakeholders, including our employees, fellow employees. I think you start to break that down. And so everybody does treat it seriously. People now walk around the office high-fiving when they caught the fish, right? That's kind of cool. And it's not just because I give them a little box of Swedish fish. It's there's a little bit of pride in that. And they kind of hang their head when they get fish. And so, including our original CEO, she's still advisor for the company. She got fished once and felt horrible, and now she's been catching every fish, and she's very proud of it, right? And that's our CEO's mother. So it's great. We're making a lot of progress just on the education front. But I do think you need to make it part of the responsibility. I don't know about a liability standpoint, from a legal standpoint, but they need to feel it. They need to own it. It's part of that culture thing we talk about, and everybody needs to help own it together.
And
definitely agree.
I was gonna say, Wade, in order for them to feel it and own it, right, is, it's not like you can just hold people accountable one day. That is a process, and that is a journey that you go through. And it sounds like you've done a great job of going through that journey, but it's a journey of educating people on what it is, telling them what the standards are, holding them accountable to it, measuring them against it, having someone scary like Wade, come and yell at you whenever you get fished. I mean, there's a journey that comes along with that, right? But if we think about it just like accidents and just like personal safety, if we had a driver who had 6 accidents in 3 weeks, they wouldn't have a job anymore, right? I mean, there are maybe not personal accountability or personal responsibility, but definitely as we educate people and as they understand what the requirements are and what the organizations expect of them and what the culture expects of them, holding them accountable to those things is just part of good leadership and good management. But you can't do it without a very solid foundation and an understanding of what those expectations are, and then a consistent and common evaluation and measurement of it.
Yeah, no, I agree. And then earlier we talked about some of the obviously with Wade's scenario of his introduction to his new job and having to, whether or not do you pay or not. But when it comes to the insurance policies, right, there's a lot of noise in the market. I don't want to say noise, but there's a lot of information out there in regards to cybersecurity insurance policies. What has been the general consensus? Is that something small, mid-sized companies should look at if they don't have the resources? What's your suggestion on that?
So for full disclosure, my company is actually owned by an insurance company. So we have a little bit of an insight to this. And I'll say, cyber policies are kind of, they're pretty embedded now, right? They're happening in a lot of places, and depending on what sector you're operating in, they're actually required, right? So in other industries, say like energy, for example, in order to do business in certain geographies or under certain regulators, you have to have a cyber insurance policy. The challenges I really have with them, and this is my own personal opinion, but the challenges I really have with them is, number one, is pricing them. How much cyber insurance do you actually need? And then what is a good rate for that? Because it's such a nascent industry, and it's very difficult to kind of understand the exposure and how much to buy. And then what coverage do you get? I talk to a lot of folks who say, well, I don't need cyber security insurance because I have business interruption insurance. But if you go look at the business interruption insurance, it clearly carves out any cyber, right? And but then when you look at some of the cyber insurance, it carves out, and we just actually had this with a client about a month or two ago. Their cyber insurance carved out acts of war. and they were penetrated by what someone thought was a foreign government. And because it was a foreign government, the insurance company called that an act of war and then said that it wasn't an insurable event, right? So, cyber insurance is just like everything else, every other part of insurance. You really need to know what it is you're buying and why you're buying it and for what is the end of the business reason. It's good and it can be very helpful, and there are good things about it. But I think you need to go into it eyes wide open, and maybe my insurance colleague somewhere up the chain won't be very happy with this, but I think it is something that you need to do your due diligence on and be aware of why you're purchasing it, right? Having insurance is not a bad thing, but it does not protect you overall, and no insurance can ever truly make you whole from an attack.
Well, all good points, because I think most companies are starting to think about that, and especially with this growing unfortunate trend that we have. We are getting a little bit tight, but I do have one more question. I think that would actually be good for the audience to kind of know. Wade, I've actually also been in a similar situation as you, except mine got resolved rather quickly because it was a small dollar amount, but we also got hit with a ransomware. And the question that I'd like to pose to you: when should companies make the payment? Do they typically get the data back when they have made payment, or, to your point, Brian, do we become an ongoing target? I think that was actually your colleague that mentioned, if you make payment, you become an ongoing target. What is the recommendation for organizations if they are hit with a ransomware? Should they make payment and get back to operating, or is it really fictitious and you make payment and you just open up a bigger hole?
Sure. I mean, I think the age-old answer of it depends, case-by-case basis. Hindsight is 20/20. I spent many hours with the FBI. I'm now involved in their InfraGard, which is kind of a partnership between the FBI and corporations. And I got to talk to the lead investigator of the SAM ransomware, which this was a variant of, and that's been debunked since about a year and a half ago. But they were professionals too. So when we brought in this Kivu company, they could tell the difference between a company that's just casting a wide net, hoping they can get in, hoping they can get the ransom. And for them, they even normalized it or standardized it to 6 Bitcoin rather than figure out how big of a company you are and what is your tolerance for payment. They just wanted volume to be the multiplier, right? The number of companies that they could get to pay the ransom, as opposed to Maersk's thing, right, where they were pretty public about what they got hit for. Obviously, much bigger company than us, but they could tell they were professionals. So they said, well, in this case, you pay the ransom, you throw the Bitcoin over, you're going to get the keys. And there's honor amongst thieves a little bit, is what I learned from the FBI 6 months later in a 3-hour phone conversation with them, is that they don't necessarily want to share their trade secrets with other people on the dark web. It was actually 2 different bad actor parties in our case. First one came in, got in through the firewall, harvested the credentials, and then they sold them on the dark web to the 2 SAM where allegedly they think they've spotted the 2 individuals, the bad actors that actually came in and planted the ransom. But it's actually 2 different parties. They sold the lists over the dark web. But then the second company, once they get their payment, they don't necessarily want to go share with everybody else because they got this model, right? It's a money-making model. It's a wallet share thing, and they don't necessarily want to share their secrets. But I think, again, like Brian said, it's evolving all the time. You can do this. Like my 17-year-old kid can do this. You can literally download these tools. It's not that hard, right? To write a ransomware email, or to get into, I would say, a third of the networks of small and mid-sized companies out there. It's pretty easy to do. They're free tools to do it. It doesn't take that long to get educated. If you're tech savvy and if you've got a will and you want to be devious and do that, it's really not that hard to do. So I think you just need to take it on a case-by-case basis. For us, it was the right thing to do.
Yeah, that was the same instance with me. I mean, it was a smaller amount and it was very localized. We are getting close to our time together on the panel, but before we do go to Q&A, if there's one thing you'd like for the audience to take away from this session, what would it be? Brian, I'll put it to you first.
Oh gosh, that's a good question. I think, the one thing that I just want to make sure everybody gets from this session is that it's not that scary, right? This is something that we all need to educate ourselves on, and it's part of everybody's role and responsibility. And the sooner that everyone that operates and that works for the company or that is part of the organization, sees it as part of their job and part of what it is that they do, I think the better off we're all going to be. So I truly believe that. And as I work with clients, trying to make sure that operations, finance, HR, everybody is a part of the solution. This is not just IT. Technology cannot do it on their own. Everybody needs to be a part of the solution. Together, we can actually be pretty formidable.
Wait.
Yeah, I'll kind of attack it from the financial standpoint. Again, a little can go a long way. You can be frugal and fiscally responsible and still make a big impact and get a lot done. I mean, our fish testing, for example, we have about a couple hundred employees. We pay $3,000 a year. It takes probably 3 or 4 hours a month of an employee to run that tool, and it's a top platform and it does a great job. We didn't spend that much even on the vulnerability scans. A lot of them are free, right? But if you want a consulting company backing it up, you can get a lot done for $5 or $10,000, which again, that type of investment versus maybe a cybersecurity policy. I also spent years in insurance, right? And that can sometimes be a good thing. That also depends on a cyber policy. But in this case, you want to at least do that blocking and tackling piece, and then have some kind of simple plan to educate your people and test your people, which is that fish testing, right? And so in the education, I hand wrote, it took me, I don't know, a couple of weeks to do and then roll it out, and I just teach it, and it's not that big of a deal. So again, it's balance. You can go a long way with a small investment, and at least make sure you're not the slowest person running from the bear, as the old analogy goes, right? So you do want to keep up with the pack. And again, I think a lot of companies, maybe at their smaller size, maybe they've neglected some of those critical investments over time, and it's just time to true up, go after it, and I'll make myself available, can help with it, and point you in the right direction. And again, you can do a lot with a little amount of money, at least to get started.
I agree. And I'll even add my own, to kind of anyone's, my best advice is, prepare to fail. No, you can't prevent every situation, but you can be prepared to handle the situation. Make sure your teams know what to do in an event. Devise a practical playbook, test it, and test it often. We oftentimes make assumptions that everyone knows what to do, but then when rubber hits the road, everyone's, emailing and calling and running around. But if, like I said, prepare to fail and have that plan and just test it. See what, make sure that everyone knows, hey, to Brian's point, right? It's not that scary. Just follow a process and stick to it, and you'll make it through. Hal, I think we're getting close to kind of the 10-minute mark. Handing the reins back over you for some Q&A from the audience.
Yeah. Well, thanks. First of all, thanks, guys. That was great. Wade, that was a harrowing story. Full disclosure, I heard it once before, and it scared me so much. I was like, we have to have Wade come tell that story again, because I think we've all been there. You're trying to get your footing, and you're trying to learn the lay of the land, and all of a sudden things go sideways. Thanks for sharing that. I think it was good to hear. We've got a number of good questions. I've got one that I want to ask out of the starting gate, because I think we always get some good sort of fundamental stuff, and this is a good one because it's a term that you used, Wade, that I think some folks know, but some don't. But the notion of double brokering, and that is a potential gateway to a lot of challenges for particularly 3PLs and motor carriers, but in general. So could you just talk a little bit about what double brokering means and how that becomes both a problem for the sort of ecosystem, but also a threat access point?
Sure, Al. Yeah, you kind of asked the wrong person. I actually went to our director of compliance before this, kind of to find out a little bit more about it. I still don't understand it. I know we do take a lot of steps with, DAT. Some people use RMIS to vet carriers and making sure that we're not sending our brokered loads to another broker who is acting as a carrier. And that's kind of masking that. Obviously, there's the concept of 4PL, and that's above board and whatever, which a lot of the big logistics companies do. This, I think, is when they're trying to hide it or shield it. We have a pretty high standard for our carriers and our drayage companies, right, that they have to meet our qualifications. We do a lot of background testing and checking. And if something doesn't smell right, we got the right people that can sniff that out. So we've not been victim to it. I think once last year, the outcome wasn't that bad, but we learned from that as well and continue to evolve and see the things that look odd to us in terms of a double brokering situation.
Great, thank you. I appreciate that. One question that kind of it's a hot topic because I know as the association gets a lot of questions, there's a lot of activity, there's a lot of discussions within our committee structure around data data usage, data collection, data transfer as a way to really evolve the efficiencies of the network. The likelihood of coming up with a technology that's going to replace the container or the chassis or the connection points between, possible, but probably years away. The reality is the evolution of the network and the efficiencies are probably going to come from data, its collection, its analysis, and its application, right? So I think that's I don't want to say a given, but it's a reality. With that comes sort of a burgeoning of data coming in, creation. So just this is all coming out of a specific question of, so we're just getting comfortable with the notion of maybe starting to transfer data between partners, and now the cyber threat thing is coming along, making us really scared about who do we trust and how do we do that. So do you guys have any advice on approaching becoming more of a collaborative player in the space with your business partners while keeping safe and having good data security standards?
Yeah, Wade, I have a comment, and then maybe you can take it from there. And I think the first comment is other people have faced this challenge before, right? There's no need to reinvent the wheel as we go through this. There's a lot we can learn, and as Wade said, in a very fiscally responsible way of engaging people from other industries or experts, third parties, in order to help us build those networks and those pipes. I mean, we're all comfortable using our phone now to pay for things or to transfer money at our banks or to look up our healthcare records or whatever. And so those sorts of things have been solved other places, and there's a lot of tools out there that can help us be very comfortable. So I think the first thing is realize we don't have to have a unique or bespoke or a solution that we have to develop ourselves. What is incumbent upon us is to try to go out and spend a little bit of time to figure out what's the best solution out there that works, that is appropriate for us, right? But I think, like everything else we've talked about today, is it's just going to take a little bit of time and a little bit of legwork, but it is not an insurmountable task. Wade, would you agree with that, or?
Yeah, for sure. And I would add, actually, it's Hal, your question is timely because COVID as well. We're talking a lot about touchless delivery, like touchless freight. Again, on the trucking side, and I think it plays everywhere. We would love to be able to not, have drivers physically take papers and sign bills of lading, right, from shippers, receivers, whatever. Mm-hmm. So we're looking at that, and there are partners, like Brian said, that will do that, kind of have end-to-end solutions. But then it's up to the shippers and receivers, right, or customers to be ready to do that. And I think obviously your larger clients, your larger shippers are going to be more risk adverse in what tech they use to replace the paper. And so I think that's still evolving. A couple companies have been pitching us for a while now, and there are solutions out there, but even they're not fully there yet. A couple of companies out there that say they're doing touchless delivery, but it's with a handful of clients. And it's clients that are pretty tech advanced and pretty, ready to embrace that digitally transmitting documents as opposed to, handing them off.
You guys have really kind of hit on at least one underlying theme, which is we'll call it price sensitivity. There's a lot of price sensitivity in the market for folks that are very price sensitive, but also want to get the ball rolling, maybe use a consultant. Do you have any suggestions about finding and vetting consultants, understanding that, price is a factor?
I'm happy to, right? So I'll tell you the way I think about that, and I think it's a great question because I think every organization needs to have a solution that's good for them. I as a consultancy and we as a consultancy, try to make sure that we build, programs for the companies that need the help, right? And so, what works for Maersk is not going to work for, a 3-person, shop out of Idaho, right? For example. So I think working with someone who understands that. I think the other thing is as you're vetting companies and as you're looking for third-party help, there is plenty of help out there at the right price point for you. You need to also be very aware that there's a lot of companies that are looking to just sell you a tool or sell you, firewall, monitoring or something like that. You really do want to find someone who's going to spend the time to understand your specific situation and help you find a solution for you. And that might be something as simple as, a local community college, or it might be a local cybersecurity firm or an individual. But take a little bit of time to educate yourself on the right questions to ask, and then do some research and ask for references and find someone who's really focused in on your operations, and is going to take the time to spend, is not trying to sell you a tool or an asset, but is going to actually help you, with the fundamental questions of the business.
Yep. Real quick, I know we're up on time, but I'll say two quick things to that. Two paths that I found are successful. One, check with your insurance company, right? Whatever policy you have, because they might have a list of ones that either give you a discount or they're kind of within their ecosystem. So that's a good thing. And that's props to Brian and his company. I mean, that's a good way to go. Another thing I found though is when you reach out to your peers, look for companies your same size. Whenever I get a salesperson that says we work with United Health Group and Target and Best Buy and all these, I'm like, we don't have their budgets, right? Like their IT team is 10 times the size of our whole company. And so in the case of United Health Group, right? So I think to get right sized, you got to say, well, whatever size company you are, that's the peer network you want to reach out to and say, who are 4 or 5 firms you know of? And then I just did a spreadsheet. I actually compared 8 firms. 2 of them were national, 6 were local. Ended up with one I thought it was a good balance of price and features. And they would do that second wave test for free. That was kind of what I went with them. So you didn't have to pay for it twice. They would do your baseline penetration test and then come back 8, 10, 12 months later and do it again. So that's
Great.
why we ended up choosing.
Yeah, that's great. I appreciate it, guys. Listen, we're up against it. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate everybody taking the time to prepare for this and be here and share these great insights with us and get this conversation going. And I really do feel like this is sort of a starting point. This is a sort of a cultural shift that we all need to be within. It's good to have this sort of, for us, as a starting point of a conversation that I'm sure will continue with the association in a number of different avenues about how to actually do this stuff and, is it working and what new threats are coming up. I appreciate you all being part of that. Attendees, thanks for being there for us. We hope that you found this useful. If you'd like more information about this program or other ones, you can find that at the Business of Intermodal Continues tab, which is on the intermodal.org website. You can also just email us. That's an easy way. We will vet those for phishing attempts and send those to our IT folks. But if they look legit, we will answer those questions. Go ahead and send those to info@intermodal.org, or go ahead and just email me at hal@intermodal.org, and we'll try to get as many of your questions and issues answered as possible. One last thank you to our year-long sponsors at the Platinum Plus level. Many thanks to the support that they give us for bringing great topics like this to the table for everybody. And with that, I will wish everybody a great afternoon. Stay safe, stay sane, wear your mask, wash your hands, stay an appropriate distance apart from each other. And hopefully we'll see you all soon, but otherwise stay safe out in the cyber land and think twice before you click on that link.
Thanks, Cap.
Hey, everybody.
Thanks, Al.
Thanks,
guys.
Al.